Assalamualaikum and good morning. Hi guys, today we will continue our PhD 473 lectures entitled Adrenocorticosteroids. So before we begin, I want you to have a look about our title. So the words of adrenocorticosteroids. So you can see the words of steroids is a compound that created by the adrenal cortex. So that's how the adrenocorticosteroids all about. So again, where the adrenal cortex is located? Adrenal cortex is located on top of your kidney. There is one gland, we call it as an adrenal gland. So it has two layers, we call it adrenal cortex and also adrenal medulla. In the adrenal cortex, they will produce three types of compounds, which is glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and gonadocorticoids. These three compounds are the adrenocorticosteroids. So this is the learning objective. It's kind like a checklist and guide you guys to have an effective learning throughout this lecture. So I hope that at the end of the lecture, you should be able to describe the HPA axis and relate it to the cortisol synthesis. Besides, you also need to know the pharmacology and therapeutic application of the steroid preparations that are available in the market. And you also need to know the side effects for corticosteroids and how to overcome it. I want you guys to have a look at the picture here first. You can see a picture of your brain, your pituitary gland, and also adrenal gland to produce cortisol by HPA axis. So HPA axis is involved complex set of interaction between these three organs. So I want to mention here to make it clear, cortisol is a natural glucocorticoid, means that it produced naturally in our body through the circadian regulation. The production of cortisol is diurnal. So let's have a look at the graph here. So what is the meaning of the diurnal? You can see the high concentration of cortisol can be found in early morning. Besides that, there's a smaller peak here in the late afternoon. The production of cortisol also can be triggered through the acute stress, such as physical stress, emotional stress, less of glucose in your body, and when you develop any fever or pain. This stress can trigger the paraventricular nucleus of hypothalamus that contains neuroendocrine neuron to release its hormone, also known as corticotropin releasing factor. The CRF will stimulate the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland to secrete adrenal corticotropic hormone, or also known as ACTH. So this ACTH will stimulate the adrenal cortex to produce the cortisol. High level of the cortisol will inhibit the HPA axis. You can see here, this is the structure of your adrenal glands. So it consists the adrenal cortex, and inside here, the red color here is your adrenal medulla. So I want to focus on the adrenal cortex. So adrenal cortex consists of three zones, which we call it zona glomerulosa, the outer layer. The central layer is zona fasciculata, and the inner layer of the adrenal cortex, we call it as a zona reticularis. Each layer produces different adrenocorticosteroids. Let's talk about the major function of adrenocorticosteroid that you can be found in the adrenal cortex. The outer layer of the adrenal cortex, also known as zona glomerulosa, will produce the aldosterone, which is natural mineralocorticoids. These aldosterone play an important role to retain the water and sodium ion in our body. In return, they will excrete the potassium ion through the urine. The central layer of the adrenal cortex, also known as zona fasciculata, will produce cortisol, which is natural glucocorticoids. Besides that, hydrocortisone and corticosterone that be found in our body is a synthetic glucocorticoids. These glucocorticoids has an anti-inflammatory activity. The presence of these glucocorticoids will increase the level of the glucose. And this glucocorticoid also has the immunosuppressive effects in our body. Besides, it can catalyze the protein and fat. Inner layer of the adrenal cortex, also known as zona reticularis, will produce the androgens and estrogens. These two compounds is a natural gonadocorticoids. Don't worry, this part will be covered by Dr. Zokapli. So for my part, I will cover on the glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids only. So the natural glucocorticoids, as I mentioned earlier, is cortisols. And the hydrocortisone, which is the drug, is mimic the cortisol structure. And aldosterone is a natural mineralocorticoid. The only drugs that available that can produce the same effect as aldosterone is a fludrocortisone. Naturally, our body will produce 10 mg to 30 mg of cortisol level in the non-stress conditions. And beside that, our body also able to produce 0.125 milligram of the aldosterone. Glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids can act on both receptors. The glucocorticoids has high affinity towards the glucocorticoid receptors. The activation of the glucocorticoid receptors by the adrenocorticosteroids can produce the anti-inflammatory response as well as suppression of the immune systems. The mineralocorticoids has high affinity towards the mineralocorticoid receptors, and these receptors has capabilities to reabsorb sodium and water in renal tubule as well as in the brain. And in charge, they promote the loss of the potassium level. These adrenocorticosteroids can be found in many types of preparations such as injections, inhaled intranasal, ophthalmic applications, and tablet or oral dosage forms. As I mentioned stated here, this is the example of the drugs of the adrenocorticosteroids drugs and also the strength of the drugs. As you can see in this chart, most of the drugs has the anti-inflammatory and mineralocorticoid activities. As I mentioned earlier, both of the drugs can act on both receptors, which is a glucocorticoid receptor and mineralocorticoid receptors to produce the salt and water retentions. They compare the drugs with the hydrocortisones because hydrocortisone is a mimic to the cortisol in our body. As you can see, the prednisone and prednisolones, they has 4 times anti-inflammatory activity compared to the hydrocortisone, but they has less mineralocorticoid activity. Because of that, 5 mg of these drugs are equivalent to 20 mg of the hydrocortisone. Another thing that I want to highlight here is the dexamethasones. Dexamethasone only acts on the glucocorticoid receptor, which is 30 times higher, more potent compared to the hydrocortisone, but there has no activity in the mineralocorticoid receptors. That's why 0.75 mg of the dexamethasone equivalent to 20 mg of the hydrocortisone. Fludrocortisone, which is the only drugs that can exert the mineralocorticoid activities, as you can see here, is 150 more potent compared to the hydrocortisone to exert the mineralocorticoid activities. But not only that, they're also 50 times potent compared to the hydrocortisone to exert the anti-inflammatory activities. So this is all the inhaler and intranasal preparation of the corticosteroids. Is it a lot? I'm just kidding, only this. So the inhaler corticosteroids act as a preventers from any asthma and COPD diseases. So all these drugs will be covered on your next semester in the PhD 502. Let's talk about the therapeutic uses of the glucocorticoids. As I mentioned earlier, glucocorticoids has the anti-inflammatory activity. It also can suppress the immune system. Besides that, as a replacement therapy for any cortisol insufficiency in our body, or we call it adrenocortical insufficiency. The basic formula: when you found any itis in the word of diseases, means that this disease can produce inflammations. So to treat the inflammations, you need the anti-inflammatory drugs, which is glucocorticoids. Recap back. All the glucocorticoid drugs has the letter of O and E at the end of the words, such as methylprednisolone, prednisolones, hydrocortisone, and fluorocortisones. So these glucocorticoids can be found in eye preparations, topical preparations, inhaler, and also in the tablet dosage form. For the eye preparation is to treat the ophthalmic diseases such as allergic conjunctivitis and keratitis. For the topical preparations is to treat the dermatological diseases such as dermatitis. Dermatitis is a disease that caused by bacterial infections that will induce the inflammations. Okay, the another functions of the glucocorticoids is suppress the immune systems. All these diseases, which is rheumatoid arthritis, here, multiple sclerosis, and systemic lupus erythematosus, is a disease due to the antibody mistakenly attacks its own organs. Adrenocorticosteroid drug can be used as a replacement therapy due to cortisol and aldosterone deficiency. This deficiency caused by the primary, secondary, and tertiary adrenal insufficiency. So let's have a look here first. So the primary adrenal insufficiency, also known as Addison disease, is due to the adrenal glands are damaged severely, that they can no longer produce any hormones such as cortisol and aldosterone. So this damage may be caused by the autoimmune disease where our immune system mistakenly attack the adrenal glands. Prolonged administration of the steroid also may induce this Addison disease, cancer, and abnormal growth of the adrenal glands. Patients on Addison disease will receive hydrocortisone 20 to 30 mg per day. Our practice usually we divide the dose into 2/3 in early morning and another 1/3 in late afternoons. So this practice is to mimic the cortisol level in circadian cycles. Secondary and tertiary adrenal insufficiency are due to disorder of the pituitary glands, which no longer produce the corticotropin secretions, which is ACTH, and also the hypothalamus gland, which will inhibit the secretion of corticotropin releasing hormone. So these secondary and tertiary insufficiency are associated with cortisol, but no mineral corticoid deficiency, because aldosterone is regulated primarily by the RAS system, which is independent of the HPA axis. Be careful on adrenal crisis, or also known as acute adrenal insufficiency. This condition is due to rapid loss of the cortisol level in the body. The cortisol deficiency due to pituitary infarction, or after surgical cure of Cushing syndrome, or abruptly withdrawn from exogenous glucocorticoids. Please take note about steroid cessations. Prolonged therapy of the corticosteroid has suppressed the HPA axis. Rapid withdrawal of the corticosteroids may lead to the adrenal crisis. It is because administration of this drug depresses the secretion of CRH and ACTH, thus inhibiting the secretion of endogenous glucocorticoids, which is cortisol, and potentially causing the atrophy of the adrenal cortex. If patients have to take long-term corticosteroid therapy, the drug should be tapered down. It because it takes some months to return to the normal HPA axis functions to produce the natural corticosteroids. The biochemical features of adrenal crisis include the hyperkalemia, hyponatremia, and also increase the serum urea levels. So hyperkalemia is a term that the potassium level in our body exceeds than the normal range, which is 5 millimole per liter. Same goes to the hyponatremia. So hyponatremia occurs because of two factors. One, because of the mineralocorticoid deficiency, and another one is because of the antidiuretic hormone, which is vasopressin, being secreted due to the cortisol deficiency. So the combine of the mineralocorticoid and glucocorticoid deficiency will lead to urinary sodium loss, plasma volume depletions, which will cause the increase of the serum urea level. To treat this, patient usually will receive IV hydrocortisone 100 mg every 8 hourly. So the dose will be given until the patient is stable. And the dose must gradually reduce to achieve the maintenance dose within 5 days. And fluorocortisone is resumed when the total hydrocortisone dosage has been reduced to 50 mg per day. Patients who receive the long-term corticosteroid therapy cannot stop the drug abruptly to avoid any adrenal crisis. So they need to taper down the dose based on the corticosteroid tapering regimen. This chart shows the differences between how to reduce the dose based on the drug that the patient receives. If the patient receives the prednisone or prednisolone, they need to reduce 2.5 mg every 3 days. Until it reaches to 5 mg, they need to switch the drugs to hydrocortisone 20 mg once daily. For the patient who receive the hydrocortisone drug, they need to reduce 10 mg every 3 days up to 1 week. So the reductions for 10 mg is continued until it reaches 20 mg once daily. Once they reach the 20 mg of hydrocortisone daily, so they need to gradually reduce the dose 2.5 milligram over weeks to months. So let's say they already reached the 20 milligrams. So the next weeks they need to reduce 2.5 milligram, which they receive 17.5 milligram. So for the following week they will receive 15 milligram per day. So to make sure they can discontinue or continue the hydrocortisone drug, it's based on the assessment of morning cortisol, which re-evaluate this patient every 4 to 6 weeks. So let's say the cortisol level on the morning is less than 85 nanomole per liter. It means that the HPA-axis of that patient has not recovered yet. So the patient need to continue the hydrocortisone drug. For those who already reached the more than 500 nanomole per liter of cortisol level in early morning, it shows that the HPA-axis is intact. So they can discontinue the hydrocortisone of drugs. Before we continue the second part of the lecture, I want to challenge you guys to convert the oral corticosteroid drugs. So these are the questions. How to convert 20 mg TDS of hydrocortisone to an equivalent daily oral prednisone dose? So have a try.